Okay, welcome. Hope everybody out there is doing well. Today we are going to be covering the big, beautiful bill, financial aid, and HR 1. And as always, we have Dr. Emil Chuck, who is the Director of Advising Services for the Health Professional Student Association. I am Laura Turner. I am the Executive Director. And we're going to be walking through the different impacts of this bill and how it's changing. There's some big changes out there for financial aid and for loans and how you can get loans. So we'll be walking through that. And we invite you to submit your questions. If you put them in on the chat on Facebook or on YouTube or wherever, we'll answer those questions live. We can bring them over onto the screen. So without any further ado, we can go ahead and get started with the first question. So financial aid and HR 1, or the One Big Beautiful Bill, what do you need to know about these changes as a current or future applicant?
So first of all, I will put in today's date. Today's date is September 7th, 2025. And I have to put that in here because there's a lot that still has to be sort of written down in terms of what the bill's implications really are. So what you should know as a current or future applicant is that most of the major changes when it comes to financial aid will go into effect next year, July 1st of 2026. So those of you who are going to be putting in an application for 2027 entry, for sure, you guys will be much more immersed and much more affected. Those of you who are trying to consider what you're going to do for entry in 2026, when the bill hopefully comes into play, that will become a little bit more interesting, especially as you hopefully continue a relationship with any professional program that you are involved in. And needless to say, at this particular time, I'm sure all of those financial aid offices and anybody who's involved with accounting at all these universities are waiting with bated breath about what's going to actually happen. What's really happening right now is that, the bill obviously has passed, but there's a period of time after the bill is passed where regulations are being written and directed towards financial aid offices and other people who, in terms of interpreting what that particular, what those rules really are going to be. So what the law really does is it tells us, here's how much money, this is what the structure is going to be, but no implementation is really in play. So the implementation really starts with the rules that each of the executive office, the White House's Department of Education, or Health and Human Services, whatever that regulatory body is, they have to make rules. And usually the timeline is that these rules get finalized by around November 1st of this year, so they can be implemented next year. There's usually some period, typically of public comment, and a lot of things that usually will have to happen. There's a number of, I am looking at some notes from other talks that have been happening here. Some people who are supposed to be giving guidance regarding how to create those rules come from Congress, like the Senate or the House, in terms of the way that they want to interpret their regulations. But hopefully by about November 1st, a lot of the implementation and a lot of the little details will be much more apparent, aside from obviously what you hear in terms of big, the big news items that we've been hearing for the last month or so. So the main thing to really worry about, if it is to worry about, is that we know some big picture things, but the little picture things in terms of how it might affect calculation of your particular student aid package, what sort of things are going to happen a little bit later on with your eligibility for certain scholarships or and so forth. That's going to come a little bit later along the line, so that the financial aid folks at all of the different schools can budget and can make certain decisions one way or another. So fortunately or unfortunately, what you should know is that things are going to change. Things are coming down the line, and we are all in the same boat until probably near the end of this calendar year to know exactly what that will mean for you as an incoming student, or if you're a current student and certainly you've got a financial aid package that requires loans and renewals and everything else, that will also become fairly clear along the way too. So we're all trying to figure out the big, huge picture and the little details that really wrap around it.
Okay, yeah, thank you for breaking that down. And yeah, so just again, you're going to want to keep your ear to the ground as far as how things are going to change. I know the big one that a lot of people have concerns about is the Grad Plus loans. And that the cap on those for medical and dental is 200,000, and for a total loan that you're allowed to take out. And for, I think, some of the other health professions is actually just 100,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, so this is one of the things that has really drawn the line, and for many of these programs, it's something that you should keep your eyes on. The people who drafted this bill, and the bill as it has been adopted, has eliminated Grad Plus loans, and they put a cap on for borrowers. So yes, for what they call professional school students or professional borrowers, these are students that normally will have a course of study that would last more than 3 years. And the limit for that is about $50,000 annually for $200,000 as a whole. And this also includes any prior graduate borrowing that you've done beforehand. So that's something to also consider, because the so-called graduate student borrowers are for those students that have participated in a program that lasts less than 3 years. And you can borrow up to $20,500 annually, which or I think that's the right number. That runs up to about $100,000 in aggregate. Now, remember what I said earlier is that as a professional borrower, your aggregate also potentially includes prior borrowing as a graduate student. So if you happen to go through a special master's program or a post-bac program, there's a cap for you, but that debt also is included. If you wind up getting admitted to a medical school or some health professional program, and you think you have, you will not get, as far as we know, according to how we interpret the current state of things, you do not get an additional $200,000. So your cap is not $300,000; it's still $200,000, and you've taken whatever amount from your 1 year of being in a post-bac program or so forth. Again, remember that's about $25,000 or whatever the right number is. So that counts against the $200,000 cap as we currently understand how this is supposed to work. Again, the rules need to be set a little bit later that might clarify it and validate what this interpretation is. So this has a lot of implications for you if you are thinking, okay, I didn't do so well in undergrad, maybe I can do a post-bac or a special master's program. Well, this now changes the calculation a little bit, especially if you go for a master's degree or any other sort of short-term post-bac type program. We're not sure exactly what the implications are for undergraduate post-bac. So if you're basically taking undergraduate coursework as a do-it-yourself post-bac, whether that actually works, it should not, under the current understanding of these definitions, it should not work against you as a graduate borrower since you're not going after a graduate level degree. So there's, as you can tell, a lot of gray space about how these rules are going to affect, the way that, however much money that you can actually borrow. Previously, if you're wondering how this worked beforehand, why we never thought about it, is that clearly previously the amount of money you could pull with regards to your undergraduate degree and your graduate and professional education were considered in two separate pools with different limits. And it's clearly, as you can probably imagine, the limit for graduate level education was set pretty high, needless to say. So we never really had this problem until these restrictions have come into play. So that's something that really is, again, we're all trying to figure this all out. And hopefully there will be some more clarity coming down the line about what these rules are going to, or how that will affect your strategy moving forward, especially if you are one of those applicants who didn't do so well in undergrad, but still are very dedicated to getting into medical school, dental school. Also, same thing happens for all of you who are non-traditional, who clearly, academic high GPAs were not part of your goals when you were first in undergrad. And so having to go back and take some of these, prerequisites and maybe a special master's, it really winds up being a much more difficult conversation on the financial implications of your decisions.
Yeah, so just to summarize, because I know we've had some people hop in here later. So if I go and do a special master's program, I'm only allowed to borrow, you said, was it 20,500?
I think the math was a little bit wrong. It's $100,000 aggregate. I think the number is so if you divide it, I think it's about 25,000. Again,
okay.
It's 20 to
so let's say I do I do a 1-year special master's program. That's 25, and I can only borrow $25,000 for that. It sounds like, based on our understanding, which, as you said, is still being clarified, and we're looking towards the end of year where we'll have a little more clarity. So then, if I get into, say, dental school, and let's say it's USC Dental, which is $124,000 a year in tuition, then I will only be able to borrow an additional, under the non-private loans, using the federal loans, an additional 175,000. Is that correct? So that would only cover me for like the first year and a half, roughly.
That is the current understanding, is that you are limited to that $50,000 amount for your first year of dental school or whatever else. So yes, the remainder would have to be covered in terms of the entire, financial aid package with whatever they offer, and also then private loans afterwards.
Okay. Well, we've got our first question here from our comments. So if you have a question, you can see we can pull your question over onto the board here and answer it live. So the first question is it possible for schools to fund under the old laws for fall 2026 if they get loans? And I assume that if they have their students get loans prior to July 2026. Do we know the answer to that question yet?
I think one of the things that I'm not sure, since I have never been in the financial aid world, is exactly what you are talking about in terms of continuing on whatever contract that you happen to be under to continue getting your loans as they are. It's normal for every student every year to declare what their living budget is. And so every year a student, as a student, your financial aid may get adjusted one way or another, based on the fact that, you now have to have a car in order for you to go to various rotation sites or whatever else. So it's also regular. It's usual business, as far as I'm aware, that every student has to basically verify that the budget that they live on is still the same. So nothing has changed regarding your rent, regarding your food, regarding everything else. Everything that had been calculated prior remains the same. So I just want to make sure that that's one little piece of it. The other is exactly how loans are really dispersed to schools on a year-by-year basis. Again, I'm not embedded in the financial aid world to really have a full understanding of this. So this is something you would have to ask your financial aid folks at the various schools you're looking at, including if you happen to be an undergrad, they would also be privy to a lot of this conversation. In a lot of those cases, usually the funds, I would say, are distributed year by year, because you just never know. If you're an undergrad and, for example, you took a leave of absence, does the schools still get your money? If they do, what happens to it? There's some things that, with regard to accounting, need to be taken into consideration. And certainly, as we're talking about the federal government, they've always, regardless of administration, they also want to make sure that every dollar is accounted for somehow or another. So I'm not sure, in terms of answering the question, if they could use the old laws for fall of 2026 if they get loans prior to July 2026. I'm going to guess that those rules that we talked about will iron out what's possible and what's not possible, that in terms of what accounting is allowed under this current culture of this law. So I wish I could give more specific about it, and it certainly will depend on a lot of other, probably a lot of other nuances that the financial aid offices and endowments are able to provide you as an answer. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, it's confusing right now because there is still a lot of uncertainty about how these are going to be handled. So if you want to get your question answered, like we answered Carrie's question, please put it down below in the comments. Talking about some of the things that are going on just in general, other outside of specifically financial aid, what opportunities are being lost? I know, we've seen a lot of things in the news about changes to NIH, research pipeline programs, administrative support, other things. What other opportunities are being impacted by these changes?
Sure. I think one of the things that's most relevant in this conversation, especially as I mentioned that rules making has to be done. For financial aid, most of your loans are technically administered under the Department of Education. Over the last few months, it's been apparent that one of the goals from the White House to people who are in charge of the Department of Education is to find a way to sort of, make the Department of Education disappear, become irrelevant, and not be very useful. So if you had been following the news, there's a ton of people in the federal government that have been laid off or furloughed, whatever the right appropriate term would wind up being. So what is going to be very interesting is, in fact, with the new regulations, who's left in the Department of Education to administer those rules, to field all the questions, or at least, figure out how to implement whatever the rules really are and distribute funds as needed through FAFSA to individual students, through schools, or whatever else have you. So I think one of the things that we have to pay, and not we as a community, but certainly everybody, all the schools, all the associations are looking very carefully at, is exactly, how feasible is it that these rules are going to be implemented? What inefficiencies are going to be introduced? Because if you have fewer people fielding a completely brand new system, it's going to be really challenging for everybody to know how to navigate and to adjust to those things. So it's certainly possible that a lot of things get delayed. I will argue saying unnecessarily, but one can't avoid it if you're really understaffed. So first of all, that's the Department of Education, and things to kind of keep a lookout with them. There's obviously a lot of other things with Department of Ed that, I won't go into in this question because I want to hit some of the other elements here. So how does it impact research? And certainly some pipeline programs as well. There are things that one keeps an eye on regarding grants for Department of Energy for research, NIH, of course, the National Science Foundation. A lot of things that you are seeing being impacted is certainly a take back, or what was called a rescission of funds related to diversity-oriented type programming. That's one of the things that people are kind of much more sensitive to. So certainly a lot of the research that has been identified as ones that apparently promote diversity and diversification of the research workforce, of the medical workforce, or overall societal workforce, those things are being clawed back. And we've all obviously been seeing even over the summer, many of these programs get either suspended, or they get suspended for a little while. They might get a little bit of money back, and we'll kind of see what happens. So certainly a number of people have told us that many of their experiences with AmeriCorps, for example, that they were intentionally trying to do after they graduated from college, they didn't get their money. Those programs did not get funded, so for a period of time they couldn't do AmeriCorps in the way that they wanted to until another source of funding was revealed, or at least the funds were unfrozen and given to the organizations that they were working for. We're kind of seeing that also happening a little bit with pipeline programs. Research is certainly being adversely affected in a lot of different ways. And if any of you happen to know people or have been in your own experience subject to these types of changes that are occurring because research labs all of a sudden had their funding suspended, so their PIs can't work anymore, and clearly everybody else they work for can't work anymore. There's a number of these personal firsthand accounts that are roaming around on the internet, and it's unfortunate that that's really is what is happening. We're seeing, if you've been following the news, a little bit of pushback because I think it's a recent resolution in the Senate that's being passed to the House, and I believe the House seems to be leaning with the Senate in trying to prevent the initial proposals of freezing NIH funding or cutting NIH funding drastically. There seems to be some movement to try to restore a good number of those funds back. We will see, especially if it passes the Congress. That's great, but will the president sign the bill? We're going to be very doubtful about that. So we'll just kind of have to do a wait and see attitude regarding those things. Now, that said, if the government is not there to fund many of these programs, the program directors, whether we're talking, pipeline programs or these types of opportunities that had some amount of federal funding supporting them, will have to find other benefactors for those types of programs. So, there's certainly a call out for many corporations, many state, local governments to find ways to sort of back and support some of these types of pipeline programs. Hospitals are doing whatever they can. Medical systems are doing whatever they can, especially for those pipeline programs that help people get into health professional careers. And so that's one thing to kind of keep in mind along that line. On the research side, there is movement from a number of significant nonprofit, non-government organizations in making moves to assure that that some research that can be salvaged can be saved through benevolence and through charitable foundation and independent support. We'll see how it goes. I mean, clearly the NIH by far was the major funder of significant amount of research, certainly in the United States and a little places around the world too. But we're like factors, I don't know what the right number is. It's like I think it's been at least like 8 to 10 times as more money than probably the combination of any other source around the world. I mean, European Science Agency or whatever. So it's going to be really hard to replace a lot of that scientific innovation unless it comes from benefactors like non-government organizations and philanthropy. There is also certainly an interest in seeing if anybody in private industry, the biotech industry, pharma industry would find a way to support some labs that are relevant to their particular program. There is talk about possibly what would happen if we had everybody, some programs that didn't fit any of those models. Would they be able to appeal to, say, private equity, some sort of venture capital firm? I mean, I have the weird dream of seeing people that run pipeline programs appear on shows like Shark Tank, and pitching their program so that they can get at least a few, like maybe up to $1 million or something, which is not a lot compared to the big amounts of money that are being taken care of by the federal government in the bill. But I think a lot of those opportunities, I think what's happening right now is, of course, there is this temporary period of time where we really don't know what's going to happen because there's no funding, and we just need to find funders. And it's just going to take time to find the money to be able to replace what has normally been run. Obviously, clearly, especially during the summer, it's, many pipeline programs that might have existed then might have shrunk in terms of the number of students that they may have served, or may not have run at all during the entire summer. So we're all kind of keeping an eye looking at that. I did put the last note in there about mentoring or community spaces. I think many of you, depending on what state you happen to be in, are probably familiar with a lot of the responses to the White House's demand that diversity initiatives be removed as, if you will call it, as something that all the universities must support. So you need to remove your DEI offices or you won't get any federal money for any of your grants. We're starting to understand and see what the response is, because this is something that if you did the cost benefit analysis, it's easier to change a name to get the money than to not change the name on principle and lose millions and millions of dollars off of your university budget. I mean, there is a point of practicality for this. So what it may mean, it depends on the state, because of course there's various states that are even more aggressive against these anti-DEI sort of stances. Certainly depending on whatever state you happen to be in. I think most prominent is the Ohio bill that passed last year, where a number of DEI offices or community-related offices appealing to minoritized populations in colleges and universities have shut down. So, we could talk first of all about specific celebrations during graduation didn't occur because, you're having a African-American celebration, a lavender ball for LGBTQ graduates of schools, those didn't occur, partly because of this pressure to remove and excise any sort of support for these types of minoritized populations at the university level. And we'll see how that percolates forward when it comes to student organizations, diversity offices in medical and health professions programs or graduate programs. I'm certain that in a lot of cases there have been some cuts or some reorganizations. Whatever has happened has happened. And whether it will just really depend on an institution on whether people unfortunately lose their jobs or not. So there's a lot of impact that's happening, especially with very good mentors and very good qualified people who, because they are passionate about and are doing research in or work in the diversity space, they are no longer available in their role with the university. So we're trying to see what exactly is going to happen on that.
Well, that's a good segue into how these changes affect programs in schools. Should we expect any closings? And then certainly, I think there's a question of if you have a school that may be struggling to fill classes, and not generally from like a medical or dental school perspective, but certainly, looking at some of the struggles that pharmacy schools and some of the other health professions have had trying to get their classes full. Do you anticipate that we should see or expect that some programs in schools will be closing? And is that something that students should, make sure they're trying to be savvy consumers, so that if they are choosing to go to a pharmacy school, for example, that they're aware of kind of how well have they been doing filling their classes?
Yeah. And that is, of course, a big multi-million-dollar question for many of us too. We talk about the fact that, we have had a number of schools across multiple professions. Vet schools, pharmacy schools have been for a while, dental schools, and many of the medical schools. There have been newer schools that have been opening over the last 4 or 5 years, certainly. So the big question out there is exactly what is going to happen to all of those schools. I'll take a little bit of a step back. And one of the things is that the impact of the Big Beautiful Bill is really specifically targeting and impacting higher education in terms of the normal way we think about traditional undergraduate institutions. So certainly your big brand name schools like Harvard and Columbia and Stanford and so forth. So institutions like those are clear targets and have been clear targets of this bill and many other actions from the White House. Includes a tax on endowments. It includes a lot of other things that really restrict the school and clamp down. Again, we will see how the judicial system will argue it, or it can be argued. It will input about whether these are legal moves or not legal moves. But one of the things for sure is happening is that there is a huge shift and a lot of financial pressure that is now placed on many schools. But the one thing that the One Big Beautiful Bill did do is that it has also been favored many, technical institutions, so vocational institutions, with a lot of the moves that it has done. So it's made a shift towards going to community colleges or vocational trade colleges, even for-profit institutions, and made them a little bit easier or more palatable options for people to pursue. We can discuss a little bit of that later on down the line, but one of the areas that I like to highlight is the Pell Grants that are out there. I think one of the moves that the bill enacted is an important piece of showing that anybody who's on a Pell Grant or some of the educational programs that any school offers needs to show some sort of outcome in terms of the number of students that get jobs in that area and what exactly, how much are they getting paid and so forth. So in some cases it's kind of nice to see for many people that, an investment in your future to get a job, you have at least some sort of outcome that's measurable, that gives you an idea that, hey, becoming, someone who's a plumber or someone who works in construction is going to give you this type of sustainable job with this type of salary, and that's what you should hopefully get as a return on your investment in your education. Those are things that are favorable in that bill. So just kind of keeping that in mind, how will this affect changes in programs in schools? I think one of the things that will certainly be affected is this shift towards really encouraging students and community colleges to pursue community college related level work. It may promote, in many cases, many of those community colleges to maybe expand some of their bachelor degree programs and be more community responsive. And so you'll see probably more nursing programs, a lot more technical assistant type, medical assistant, vet tech. Those types of programs will certainly, I think, be there and be relevant. Now, back to should we expect any closings? I'm not sure. That's going to be a really tough question, and it's going to be highly dependent on the budget of each individual program. I sort of will go from the time of the dental schools back in like the mid 80s, where there were closings of dental schools at that time period. And so I think there was pressure at that point saying that at that time, believe it or not, we're producing too many dentists. And running a dental school is really, really hard financially. And I mean, not that running a medical school is any easier. I don't know. I think if anyone were really going to look at the books of most of the universities that have medical schools there, medical schools generally are running deficits relative to the university budget. There's, even with, all of the other relationships they have with healthcare systems around around where they are, it's really, really difficult. And I don't know if people who run medical schools think that they have to run at cost neutral. It'd be great if they did, but most of their funding that supports medical schools comes from the research side, and we can talk about that. So if all of these types of income streams really start squeezing a university's budget, then it's going to be up to the university to figure out, if we're going to keep everything even for their overall university budget, what then needs to be cut. We have seen, and you probably have seen, various schools cut undergraduate majors already. Many of them probably related to the DEI issue, because they're all diversity, ethnic studies, or whatever else, or those sorts of degrees are certainly under assault or under much scrutiny. And certainly a lot of liberal arts degrees, I think, are also under the same types of pressures. We've certainly seen a lot of graduate programs, PhD level programs, that have suspended their admissions processes. So they're not taking graduate students for certain programs at certain universities. So, will this also go into, medical and dental schools and so forth? We'll just have to kind of see. It's certainly conceivable and is a possibility. I'm not one to root for closings because, I think everyone should have an opportunity to be educated. And I'm not the type of person who likes to see any sort of university close. And there's already enough pressure for many other universities, small liberal arts colleges, that have been closing over the last 10 years. So, it's certainly possible. And whether these new rules and law changes the calculus that some schools are just going to have to find someone else to merge with or something, if it's a little bit more of an accelerated rate compared to before the bill. It's possible, but as I said, all I can say is we will see how much support each of those programs gets in the future. So yes, keep your eye out on the pharmacy programs, which there's certainly plenty of those. Keep your eyes for I don't know about PA programs, because I think PA is still very, very lucrative, and a lot of programs have been doing PA, including programs that are PA programs outside and not affiliated with medical schools. So, but we'll kind of have to see, we'll have to kind of see where that really goes and what happens with regards to merging schools or any sort of other agreement that exists out there. So I know that's a very long-winded way of saying it's going to affect. Yeah, we're going to see what the changes are, but anything is on the table at this point.
Okay. Well, I do want to highlight again, if you have any questions, please put them in the comments on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, wherever you're watching this, and we'll be happy to answer those questions here live. I'm going to skip forward to this question about, should I ask? So is this a question that if I get an interview to go to a program, is that a reasonable question for me to be asking about, how are you being impacted by the things that are happening with this bill? Can I ask that in my interview? Is that going to look bad, or is that a reasonable question to ask given all of the changes that are going on?
I mean, I do think that, if you can't really avoid the elephant in the room. I think it's going to be very natural to ask those types of questions. What's happening at your program? How is your program adjusted to these types of changes? What's different now than a year ago or 2 years ago? And I'm sure that at least when it comes to medical and dental education, for the most part, there's still a very strong commitment to understanding that, social justice is an essential part of being a physician and being part of healthcare. If we're going to enact healthcare properly and morally correctly, you need to make sure that it is equitable, that you need to make sure everyone's needs are addressed somehow or another. So it'll be very difficult to see how that is at all extracted from your curriculum. It just, I don't think that would wind up being the case, but other opportunities within your medical school may be affected one way or another about that. So I think it's certainly in bounds. And quite frankly, the people who are the administrators should know what exactly, if they don't know, there's a good reason. We all really don't know. So, again, if these rules aren't going to be in play until we have some insight, some guidance by November, if you're fortunate enough to be in an interview now until then, just expect that they're not going to be able to answer the question very easily. But on the other hand, what can we do until then? How can, what are the things that they want you to pay attention to in terms of making sure your FAFSA is submitted properly and in time, and other sort of information that would really help them prepare whatever larger budget that they need to think about, and also anticipate what the needs are from financial aid. We'll just have to kind of see. But again, I think one of the challenges is figuring out exactly how it's going to affect your program. If your research opportunities or your opportunities to work with underserved communities are adversely affected, you got to know. And if that may change your confidence in wanting to attend that school and get what you really want out of it. But I don't know if schools are going to be that. I hope schools and medical schools are not going to be that easy to give that up so quickly. But other factors will come in the way one way or another about that. I think one of the things that you may expect curricularly to happen is that the One Big Beautiful Bill, if you happen to be in a program that tracks you to rural health, for example. So a lot of rural health clinics and hospitals are going to be under a lot of pressure financially through the One Big Beautiful Bill because of the cuts in Medicaid and Medicare that really fund and support rural health. So if these cuts are enacted and are not changed one way or another, what's going to really happen in a very bad way is a lot of rural hospitals have been closing. So it's become much more difficult for people to, one, find residencies in rural hospitals, two, do clerkships, and all of the impact that you want to help people in rural communities, that goes away because there's just not any funding to support hospitals in those areas. So there's a lot of other long-term impact that's where everyone is trying to get a handle on when it comes to Medicaid, Medicare, how it covers hospitals, how it covers individual providers in terms of the level of reimbursement that you get. If certain things happen regarding the number of slots that are funded for residencies and fellowships and stuff like that. So there's a lot of other longer term implications and a lot of dominoes that are going to fall. So yes, this goes to this question too. Thank you.
Yeah, it seemed like you were starting to get into it, so I just went ahead and switched over to this question about, what are the impact on future healthcare opportunities? Will we lose rural training spaces and see more private equity influence? Certainly, we've seen a lot of private equity going into particularly rural emergency rooms rather, and kind of purchasing up emergency rooms and seeing impacts from that in the way that those emergency rooms are being run, with potentially lower staffing of physicians, as well as some of those rural emergency rooms just getting closed down, so there's those impacts. There's also been a lot of impacts for maternity care, I know, with some of the other changes. So we're seeing there are a lot of these major trends that are impacting training opportunities for students, and where people can get their training. So any additional comments that you have on that, as far as, not just looking at, how is this impacting, the Grad Plus loans going away? There's going to be impacts to that and how much tuition I have to pay. But if I'm looking down the road towards, 4 years from now, I'm going to be wanting to go into a residency. Are my residency options going to be changing because of what's going on?
And thank you for reminding me. There is definitely even more. And one of the major things is the loan repayment program. So all the loan repayment programs are changing under this situation too. First and foremost, if you go for a private loan, any amount you put on a private loan is not eligible for a federal loan repayment or forgiveness program. So that's, by limiting the amount that is given to you through the federal government, well, okay, great. But that means that has a lot of implications, especially if you're going into primary care or any sort of medically underserved area. So we're really unsure right now what's going to happen, what the implications are for programs like Health Profession Scholarship Program. Personally, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, right now the current administration is one, and everybody else who's following along in their leadership are very anti-loan forgiveness. And so they have created a loan repayment sort of scheme, as it were, where there is an income-based program. There's also a standard program. I think from the notes that I have from all the various talks that I hear from, the standard plan is a 10-year plan that extends up to 25 years for larger debts. And then there's an income-based plan, which is 10% of your discretionary income, which you get forgiven after 30 years of working in that field. So, you have to really, really know this is what you want to do. And you can talk to a lot of people. I know, anybody like from White Coat Investor, anybody who does anything regarding finance for doctors or health professionals, we can kind of give you an idea of what the pluses and minuses are from that standpoint about one plan or the other. But it's really, really challenging. Also to note, from the notes that I have from some talks, residencies and internships, they do not count towards the public service loan forgiveness timeline. So, you're pushing that out even more if you're going to go to a 5-year, residency program. The clock doesn't start until afterwards. So it really has a lot of implications for your long-term personal finance viability going along the line. And obviously, a lot of people see the implications of that as, a lot fewer people who would do more primary care or working in medically underserved areas, a lot more people who would rather do more financially ludicrous types of careers, so you can more quickly pay off whatever debts that you can. So there certainly is an anticipation that social models are suggesting that, all of these moves in aggregate are going to adversely affect the diversity of our training workforce, and also will hurt medically underserved areas throughout the U.S. That is what is likely to happen, unless and until, again, most of these impacts don't really start occurring until July 1st, 2026, but you won't really feel it until much, much later on, way after all the people have their chance to not get voted, to be voted to be reelected or whatever else and retain their power. So there's a lot of implications that, people who have studied the effects of these changes are going to be. And the question is whether enough people in the United States who can vote will believe those experts or not. We certainly have people in the government who say don't believe any experts. So go from there.
Yeah, you did mention White Coat Investor, and I know that they have a book that they offer for free to medical students. We're not affiliated with them other than, we've done some interviews with them in the past, but that might be something to look into if you are a current medical student. So get that free book, and it talks about the finances and what you should think about. And one additional thing on the public service loan forgiveness, my understanding is also that they have, in addition to making it kind of more challenging, they've tightened the restrictions or the definitions of what qualifies as like a public service organization. Mm-hmm. So like the organizations that are allowed to offer this, it used to be a little bit broader and now is more narrow. Is that correct? And can you speak to that a little bit? Or
it certainly would not. It would certainly not be a surprise. I'd have to look a little bit more into what specifically the restrictions are, or what they say how they would restrict. Again, subject to whatever the rules changes or rules clarifications are going to be later on during time. But especially, as I said, given the philosophical approach that the current administration has implemented and what their tendencies really have been regarding what types of organizations can qualify for public service loan forgiveness. It would not surprise me if organizations that say work with transgender individuals or work with for equity in maternal care or maternal child health. I'm not sure yet in terms of Indian Health, in terms of the Indian Health Service, but certainly it would not surprise me. If those were targets, and I encourage those of you who are interested in those areas and wanting to work with them or have been working with them to pay attention to them or see what they are discovering on their own in terms of their interactions with the federal government, at least on the executive side, about what they're hearing about that.
Okay, well, we've been going for about 45 minutes now, and so we talked about the Grad Plus loans and the new or the elimination of Grad Plus and the replacement with these new loans that have the limits for graduate borrowing of $200,000 for medical and dental, and I think $100,000 for other programs. You talked a little bit about how some funds are getting are focused more on sort of technical education, so community college. There might be more opportunities for things such as your clinical certifications, so that you could go potentially get clinical experiences. But conversely, on the research side, that we've seen a lot of research dollars pulled, so there might be a lot fewer opportunities for students to get research experience, kind of some of those traditional things that like pre-meds tend to do. And there's also been just, every day, or not every day, but every, week over week, there's constantly new developments that are coming out. I know there was something, I think it was last week, where Health and Human Services was talking about wanting to introduce more nutrition and more of the idea of nutrition and how that impacts health into medical school curriculums. So I guess the question is, how can you keep up with all these new developments? And is there a good way, or what's your recommendation for students, particularly those maybe who are about to go out on interviews and they want to make sure they're keeping up with all of the stuff that is coming down the pike, or who are going to be, or looking at, planning out for their application cycle next year? What are some ways that they should approach keeping up with all these developments?
So I will basically tell you how I keep up with those developments, and a lot of it is certainly I enjoy the fact that I have the time to be able to look up a lot of different websites and rely on certain voices that really are paying attention and are lobbying on behalf of their various professions. And so many of the talks that I refer to come from these major organizations. So many of you obviously are familiar with the big organizations such as AAMC, AACOM, ADIA, all of those large educational professional societies. So you may just think about I'm just going to pick on AAMC. You may just think of AAMC as, oh yeah, that's the group that we have to apply through and have to take the MCAT and do all this other stuff. AAMC as an organization is so much bigger than just the admissions process to get you into medical school. That's certainly not the case for most of the other organizations, but for the most part, most of the other organizations also, only a small part of their charge is really about the admissions process to get you in. They're about the overall sort of culture of education and the means of supporting doctors and learners or whatever else through the continuum of their training. Then they hand them off to like the more traditional professional societies like the American Medical Association, American Dental Association, and so forth. So all of those organizations, the collection of organizations that represent the schools and training sites and training hospitals like AAMC, and then the larger organizations that basically embrace specific professions or even specialties within a profession. So the AMA or the NMA, the National Medical Association, and National Dental Association, and so forth. All of those organizations generally have some lobbying office. They're like an office of governmental relations or congressional relations or whatever else, both at the state level as well as the national level. And one of the things that you will ultimately learn as a health professional is understanding their role in trying to advocate for all physicians, all dentists, and whatever else. At least that is the position that they take. Whether you can argue whether they really represent you or not, because I'm sure not everybody who's a doctor feels they are well represented by AMA, but that being what it is, those offices are clearly focused on certain legislative priorities that they have with every member of Congress, every member of the White House team, or whatever else. So all these big national organizations have some sort of advocacy office or government relations office. These are the ones that are currently pushing out all of these new webinars and seminars about what to do with regards to Big Beautiful Bill. What are you going to do with funding cuts to NIH or other sort of things that are happening? So how I keep up is I just wind up, because I have such a broad spectrum, I have a lot of these different government organizations that, I get notices about. And that's what normally happens when you become a professional and you become a professional member, you get these notices. So if you wound up joining AMSA, the American Medical Student Association, I'm sure you're going to get something similar to that from them. So this is where your networking really comes into play. And again, if you are aspiring to be, a health professional, nursing, physical therapy, whatever you want to, those organizations have some person who either is directly lobbying Congress and other parts of government, or they're connected to a consortium of lobbyists. They're the ones that advise and tell you what's happening in various state houses and gives you a little bit of insight about that. So that if you really wanted to keep up, depending on how many schools you applied to, I encourage you to, if you were, say, applying to Vanderbilt or Meharry, which is in Tennessee, not just keep up with what's going on in Congress, but also keep up with what's going on in the state house, because it's very different there versus in Texas or in Ohio. The cultural differences in one state, the red state versus a blue state, are just remarkably different. Especially in those tricky ethics questions that you think you may be tripped up on, and you may have a very good grandiose idea based on basic principles of ethics. For interviews, it should be fine, but realize that there are some nuances that in a state-to-state way can completely change the way you answer the question, because, the way you think you can answer it, you actually are breaking the law. Or you could be breaking the law and endangering your ability to practice. So these are things that I really kind of will tell you is how I keep up with it. How you can keep up with it, because you probably don't have the time. This is something that I've been doing for the last 3 years. It's built into a course that we call Becoming a Student Doctor. And it's a course that we've developed, or I've developed, to just try to keep you informed with, how does all these contemporary issues really matter to you in your future for the next 10 years? Now, this was done well before the Big Beautiful Bill came up. This actually was a little bit of the response from COVID. And I think a lot of things that we've all learned over the last 5+ years because of COVID, I think that frames us in the way that we look at why we think we want to be in healthcare in the first place. So that's one of the things that I'm certainly say we've been developing over the last 3 years. For those of you who are currently either in the interview process, or maybe you're planning your pre-writing for the 2026-27 application cycle, because I know we're starting to push that out. AAMC, the AMCAS team finally put some stuff out for, hey, are you applying for 2027? Here's a couple of things to benchmark your journey to prepare for your application. We'll do the same thing, and it's probably good to get a good handle on what those things really are now. So how are things being viewed for medicine versus in dentistry and so forth? We mentioned a little bit about nutrition and nutrition education. How are all the medical schools already dealing with it before this other quote unquote, concern from the White House? It's interesting because it's like, we have answers, and you should know what those answers are and how it shapes your confidence that going to the school that you have on your list is really where you want to be, because it's hard to tell otherwise. So unless you really want to be spammed by so many different emails like I do, I do my best to kind of, even have some aggregation help with that. Hopefully that helps you a lot too. We do keep track of it. We do have a topics in healthcare thread that we post on our social media. There's a forum, sub forum that talks about that too. But we do our very best to try to keep everything at least for you to know about that. And so please don't hesitate, keep up with us, and certainly consider joining our Becoming a Student Doctor course if you can. And I think I sent information to Laura about that.
Yes, yeah. So I just posted that in the comments section. So if you're interested in that, you can find it on the studentdoctor.net website, or you can go to the link that I had posted there. And yeah, certainly, I'm sure all of those organizations are happy to have you, get your email address and start sending you, spamming you, basically. Even your probably local state house has something where they'll send you stuff out on particular topics, or you can do like the Google search. But the benefit of the course, the Becoming a Student Doctor course, is it does, we provide some curation there and some support on how you can kind of frame responses to some of these questions. And
certainly being an advocate and joining your voice with a lot of these movements to try to push back on some of these very detrimental changes is very important. The more voices that there are, the easier, in one way, at least, the easier it is to show the powers that be that, there's a lot of concern with the direction of what some of these proposals really are having, and it will be very adverse effects. And we are doing whatever we can, however little that we can do. This is something that ultimately does make a change. I think if it weren't for a lot of grassroots efforts, some of these changes we're certainly seeing right now with NIH having some of its funding restored would not have happened had it not been from a lot of effort to really get as many people to really voice how displeased they would be if NIH would lose its funding because of all the bad things that would happen with the teaching hospitals all across the country, and what its ultimate effects are with the economy, health, everything else like that.
Great. And again, so the link is in there. And then I also wanted to share, and I will put this in the comments as well, is that we do have a discount available for folks who are watching this. If you enter EAL10 into the coupon code area, you are able to get 10% off the course. So if that's something that helps you be able to join the course, we hope that would be useful for you.
And the course is not expensive. We're not talking thousands of dollars.
Yeah, it's $50. So yeah, you're getting it's going down to 45. So it's really a pretty reasonably priced course. It's self-paced. So it is something that we're very proud of, and we're very excited to have students participate in and have that help them with their applications. Do you have any final closing thoughts, or just basically just keep an eye out and watch for future changes, because things are really are changing on a day-by-day basis. You've seen, some of the vaccine regulation or ruling changes, and the different states starting to create their own groups. So and anything else as a final closing item?
I know, and I don't mean to be disrespectful for anybody who falls under this category. I know when it's not deliberate that we've forgotten the discussion of international students and visas and everything else regarding that. That is obviously a complete mess right now, with so many students that can't get their visas renewed, so they're not able to come back to the U.S. to take their courses at their various institutions. There's a lot that's been going on with regards to renewal of visas and all of the implications thereafter. And certainly as a result, any of you who are undocumented or have, or your citizenship, you're trying to get to green card status, all of that comes into play with what's been going on too. So I know we're trying to hopefully get a little bit more of an idea about that, but we are certainly aware of so many visas that have been suspended. And so people and the scenes of the many graduate students for sure that have had ICE people come and just like swoop them off the street to be detained is crazy. But it's happening. And so I want to just make sure and I acknowledge that is certainly something that has chilled a lot of people on campus in terms of how to react and respond to it, because what can you do? So there's so much more in higher ed. And I really, for those of you currently in school, obviously do things that are practical with regards to at least, showing resistance or, voicing your displeasure about things. But understand that, again, the people who are above you are very limited in terms of what they want to be, what they're able to do. In the end, everyone wants to have a university that's functioning. Even if it's not at 100% or in an ideal type of sense. We want you to go to school, and we want you to complete your courses, and we want you to do whatever we can to get you to your career goals and so forth from there. It does not help anybody to have, opportunities or resources disappear from you. And certainly your own classmates to disappear from you is not very comforting either. So I just want to make sure that I, at least make sure that we did not forget that there's just so much going on, and do what you can to kind of, do what you can to stay focused, keep your, mental health and wellness as much of a priority as you can. But these are issues that will have long-standing effects and consequences well into the future as a health professional and as a person, as a citizen in general too.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. And we're out of time now. So thank you for joining us. Our next session is going to be in 2 weeks, and we're going to be talking about clinical experiences at that time. And I know one of the big questions that it's always popping up on the forums is, does this qualify as clinical experience? So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of those questions. And again, thank you for joining us, and we wish you a pleasant rest of your day.
Thanks for being part of it. Thanks for being part of our program today. And